spring update for Smart Curriculum app. There have been a number of features that have been created and adapted for you in terms of the dashboards and information that you are going to find useful in terms of the presentation of data. So this school, St February Secondary, you'll be familiar with if you've seen some of our other updates. It's a secondary school. But here on the dashboard, you'll see a number of changes. In terms of presentation, it looks a few things have been moved around. Now, we're going to deal with them in turn. Curriculum enhancement hasn't changed at all. It's exactly as it was, but you'll see the first set of changes within the staffing enhancement board. The first thing is that previously we would have only shown the blue and the orange, as still remains within the support hours elements. But we've added some detail to provide more clarity about this enhancement feature. Within the support hours, the enhancement is considered the difference between the planned time and the bought time. In this case, slightly less bought time than planned, 10.5 hours. So there is no enhancement in this case. It's a question of deployment of staff. But in the teaching staff, you'll notice that we've added some coloured elements to the staffing. A number of schools have asked us to explain a little bit more about where this data comes from and why it's so significant. Now, what you will see is that when you hover over, let's say, the green element first, it gives you an amount of management time. Now, that's the assigned time for out of your full capacity, so the cycle times the full-time equivalent teaching staff. The management time is the time that's given to leave the school. So a head of department or a head teacher or a senior leader in the school being given teaching time that's given specifically to the leadership and the management of the school. In this school, that equates to 374 teaching periods. The next section is the standard non-contact time. Now, that standard non-contact time is different for every school. In most primary schools, that's equivalent to PPA, 10% of the teaching time available. Now, in this school, the equivalent PPA time is 341 teaching periods. That's so with all the breakdown for part-time staff, and that's why you'll see some decimalization there, the equivalent 10% of part-time and full-time staff given as planning preparation and an assessment time. Now, in addition to that, some schools make more time available to staff as non-teaching time. That's why we refer to it as standard non-teaching time. Non-contact time. The standard non-contact time is PPA plus. In this school, that equates to 530 periods, where teachers are bought teaching time is bought for teachers, but they are not using it in teaching. Now that means the time that's left is the time that is bought to teach. In this case, 2,450 teaching periods is 61 teaching periods more than the planned teaching time. So we have three characteristics: surplus, standard non-contact time, and management time. Enhancement is the investment in teachers, so it's the equivalent of the standard non-teaching time above PPA plus the management time. Now that time is given a value. The value is the amount of that time multiplied by the lesson or the hour cost per week. So in a multi-week timetable, a multi-day timetable, we would take out that element and get to what does it cost per hour. So in this case, it would be just short of £1 million worth of investment in standard non-contact time and your management time. Now, in addition to that, we've got the cost of the surplus teaching. And in this case, there's just short of £90,000 worth of surplus teaching. So we're investing in time that's not assigned to teaching. Now, in the case of support, it's purely the difference between planned and bought time. Now, in addition to these elements, now these are replicated in our staffing table. So these have now been added to staffing in the same ways. And then you've got your legend, which gives you that information. And that takes you to a table, which gives you that information. We go back to the dashboard. There is this table that's been clarified. Some of the data that just appeared under the chart has been brought up into the right-hand side of the table. In the left-hand side of the table, we've been asked to provide a proportion, a ratio of teaching time to support time. So in this case, 10 hours of teaching time has been bought for every 1 hour of support time. And the ratio gives you that proportion, 10 hours of teaching to 1 hour of support. And that measure just gives an indication, and it's RAG rated just to give you, and 10 hours is quite normal. Now, there are no national benchmarks for that proportion because obviously it's relative to each situation and the context of each establishment. But we've given a view, and obviously, if you are getting to the point where you're sort of 1 hour to every, there's a 1 hour of teaching to every 1 hour of support, there's a question to ask about whether the relative investment is right for the school. And that will come up as a red flag saying this is something that needs to be considered. It's not wrong, it's just something that would need to be considered. So in terms of what's on the new dashboard, staffing enhancement has been developed so it gives you a bit more detail. Within the financial enhancement, we have also added a comparison of admin cost per hour per week. Now, before that, we only had teacher and education support, but we've added this element of admin cost as well. So that is the dashboard developments within the spring update. Now, just to compare the similar outline with the primary school, you can see the dashboard for the staffing enhancement looks slightly different. In this case, standard non-contact time, including PPA, is the same. There's no addition. There's the amount of teaching time. There's the value of surplus time, and then the proportion of teaching time to non-teaching or support time, the value of teaching, or the ratio of teaching time to support time is somewhere around 1 to 1, just slightly less. So we've got 516 hours of support and 450 hours of bought teaching time. And there would need to be here a conversation about how this is working within the school. Now we come to the deeper elements of updates. So we've already mentioned that the bought and planned comparison has been developed so that we've got some more detail for you. As you move down the screen, slight update on the deployment, so the management group analysis, the staff deployment chart, where some people were struggling with the names that they were calling the management groups, and we've done some rationalizing of the presentation, so it should not cause difficulties now with text overlapping. If we move down the screen, you'll now see that we've got a visualization of contact ratio. You'll know that this is one of the primary features of ICFP. It's one of the magnificent seven measures. Contact ratio is an interesting one because the targets that we know that schools are being targeted to reach, between 75 and 80% contact, that's rarely achieved. And we want to get to a point where we can understand what's contributing to the reduction in that contact ratio. Now, that's not to say that the goal is, the recommended is between these two figures, but how is that achievable? So what we've done is broken it down visually so you can see what's contributing to your level of contact. And in this case, we've got the unassigned teaching time, the blue, the enhanced time, now that's the standard non-contact time plus, the management time, and standard PPA. So on the front screen, the purple and the pink are shown as one costed item. So PPA plus the standard non-contact time, that enhancement figure. So in this case, 15.6% of your time is, or the time of this school, is given to planning preparation and the whole staffing body not being involved in facing children in a classroom. The management time makes up 11% of the time, and in this case, 3.4% of the time that's bought is unassigned. It's not planned as PPA or standard non-contact time. It's not given to management time, which means that this sum total gives you a 70% contact ratio, meaning 70% of the staff are facing children at any point in the cycle. Now that number is well below the 75% recommended range, 75 to 80%, but we can see what contribution each of those elements are making. A lot of management time, can't do anything about standard PPA because it will always be 10%, and what we're giving in enhanced standard non-contact time and unassigned time, these are the two that we could affect, and obviously we might consider the management time. Now, obviously that's going to vary between schools, and we might make some specific decisions about how that is deployed. But it's something to consider as you look at this metric within the school. And then obviously as you move to the charts, we've got this data here. DfE recommends this level. There is the level we've reached, but we've got more data around that, how that's happening. So the average allocation, the number of staff that we've bought, the size of the leadership team, the number of people that have got TLRs and leadership scales. In this case, our recommendation is that if this leadership and TLR percentage is larger than 45%, then you're probably moving into territory that might be more challenging to achieve those goals. But it now gives you that representation so you can explore it at greater depth. In this new contact ratio for a primary school, so again, our February primary school, here we have a very simple representation of the contact ratio. Again, achieved 75%. Here is our unassigned time, the bought teaching time that's not assigned to facing children in the classroom, and my standard PPA at 10%. In this case, 75% contact ratio has been achieved. Now, if we come to the finance section, you'll be familiar with the finance charts. If we navigate down the page to the cost per pupil, originally this chart was fed from a table within the global parameters where you had to enter, because you were given the ORPU, the age-weighted pupil unit, for each child. In recent publications of the budgets, that data has not been included, so it's just a global figure, and you will need to calculate that yourself. So what we've done is to create that piece of data for you, but it means that the main school, as in compulsory education, that's from year 1 through to, year reception through to year 11, it will calculate based on the GAG. For the reception, nursery and sixth form, for nursery and for sixth form, you have separate funding lines. We'll go and look at that in a second, but those funding lines, again, will be divided by pupil, and so the number of pupils within each of these year groups, and then it will divide the funds by the pupils, and that will give you an average per pupil funding figure. Now you can see in this case, that's automatically calculating, and obviously this sixth form is costing more than per pupil than money is coming in. So this gives you an automatic representation of that data. Now, just to go through where that comes from. So remember, the data is entered in the data entry hub. We navigate down to the global parameters. And here we've got IO1, which is funds for the main school, whether you're primary or secondary. IO2 will be funds for the sixth form students, and that gives me a figure. And I20 will be my nursery income, and in this case it's a secondary school, so there's nothing, but obviously for a a primary school with a nursery, you would have your delegated funds and you would have your nursery income, and the sixth form would be zeroed. Just below that cost per pupil chart, we have a new setup within the staff expenditure. You'll know and remember the income. So we've got grant income and self-generated funds, in this case, very small figure, the self-generated funds. Real challenge for schools during the pandemic where self-generated funds have really dipped. So it's really interesting and important to be able to see those two distinctions about how that contributes to the whole budget. Because so much now has been said about or the change in the way that we represent the proportional spend, rather than spend of income, spend of expenditure, because there's this desire to ensure that we have some balance and we have some carry forward and we are developing reserves. We've changed the presentation of the staffing chart, but we've also added this expenditure line too. So in terms of your total expenditure, in this case, spending is 85.9% of the total income, and there is some balance or reserve being built. And then in the staffing chart, we are now representing the percentage spend on total staff of expenditure, and then the total spend of your grant funding. So how much of your grant funding are you spending on staff, and how much are you relying on self-generated funds? Now, in this case, in our sample school, 89% of the expenditure is spent on the total staffing, and it breaks it down to 68% teachers and 20% on admin. Now, in this case, you can then compare that with the benchmarking site, the DFE benchmarking site, where the norms for your type of school are being shown, but we're giving you the figures that you're actually spending. And then obviously that translates to how that spend looks proportionally. Now, once you've got an idea of how your spending is going, we want to look at that in a little bit more detail. So we've added this enhancement table. So it's going to give me an idea of what's the capacity of my teaching staff, the number of teaching staff, the number of teachers, and the number of periods that they are going to, teaching periods they're going to provide, the amount of standard non-contact time above PPA, does that look like, and how much does it cost me? And this is a question of investment. If I know that I want to add to the standard non-contact time for the well-being of staff and for their ability to do the job within your context, I can now quantify how much that is costing me. And in this case, £325,000, nearly £326,000 is spent on that enhancement of staff time. Now, it may be, and some schools are beginning to consider this, that is a measure that indicates, particularly if you've got a high pupil premium grant, that we want to say that, well, we're giving staff time to plan and prepare carefully, and that lessons are well planned and well prepared, and assessment is done and feedback loops are being met. And therefore, part of this standard non-contact time becomes part of our PPG spend. And we have schools that are using the app that are using that evidence to suggest that's where they're spending some of their PPG money. We can then quantify the amount of management time that is invested in the school and how much it costs, the amount of unassigned teaching time and what that's costing. Now, in the primary school, that's generally very low, tends to be larger in a secondary school, and you've got a proportion of what that's spending. And just keeping an eye on what that level is within the school is important. Then the total enhancement, that's the total investment in management time, standard non-contact time and PPA. What does that actually cost me? So time that I'm buying, teaching time that I'm buying that I'm not using for teaching. And in this case, it's about £1 million worth of teaching time. Now, what we've done in addition to that is to say, look, this is about staff and their ability to do the job, as well as actually teaching, all the preparation and planning and assessment and leadership and that goes on within the school. But we're also saying you've declared a staff development budget, and then how much of that budget would typically be assigned to each teacher. Now, at the moment, that the staff development budget, we're fully aware that that wouldn't be spent just on teachers, that some support staff will get trained out of that budget too, just simply because we don't ask you to divide it. This is just an indicator. So how much is that staff development budget spent if it was distributed equally among the teachers? So it's a roughly £659 each in terms of training investment. So that's our training budget and how much is distributed among the teachers. In time, we will make that more sophisticated, so you could assign a training budget to support staff and teaching staff and then make a division. Now, again, we do the same with our support staff. We can say the total number of staff, the cost per hour, the unassigned time, and the support enhancement cost. Okay, finally, I just want to add a small amount of detail from the staffing table where we've adapted, added to, and clarified some detail around staffing. You will be aware that there are on leave, active, and contract within the fields within the initial setup stage. On leave means that a member of staff is within their contract, paid, but not necessarily contributing to the time allocations within the school. This is useful when you're modelling to suggest that this member of staff is still on contract and is costing an amount, whether they're admin, support, or teachers, but they are not actively making contribution to the school at the moment. Important in terms of modelling forward. The active column has a different function. This, when it's turned to inactive and they are removed to the deactivated entry table, it means that the member of staff makes no contribution to the time requirements for the school, as in their teaching time or their support or admin time, but they also make, or they're taken off the financial cost implications because they would be inactive. It's like saying that a member of staff has left. But as we've said many times to schools, each of these table lines should be considered as a contract. You can change the member of staff's initials to the new member of staff if it's a member of staff leaving and then being replaced. But an inactive person is someone who is being taken out of the structure or modeled to see what happens with a new staffing profile. The point of doing it this way is it reduces implications of members of staff in a restructuring position that might move to, well, you're trying to get rid of me. This is a question of being able to model what would happen within a structure. So it's reducing the liability to constructive dismissal with spreadsheets flying around all over the place. This is simply allowing leaders of schools and governance of schools to model the implications of moving forward. So active, inactive takes the person financially out of the picture, or at least not the person, the contract. Now, this is a very useful tool in modeling. In terms of picturing and looking at the way that the structure is going to work within the school, we go to the contract type. Now here we've made some clarifications of what's going on for the members of staff. You can see within the first part of this, we've got lots of admin and support members of staff, TAs and HLTAs within the support staff, and then general admin within, this one's been divided down into the clerical and premises. But you'll notice here also we've got apprentice members of staff. So there will be cost implications for apprentices within each of these three elements, admin, support, and teaching. But there are different contract statuses for people. You can see here, we've got a fixed term contract. All of the others here are permanent contracts. Now, what we've been asked to do is to clarify this a little bit further. So if I take any one of these members of staff, you will see that we've now got agency as a contract, so we can identify the members of staff that are provided by an agency. Now, they may be long-term, they would generally be fixed-term, but we would suggest that there's a difference there between an agency member of staff and a fixed-term employed member of staff. You might be buying something for a period of time because there's a job particularly to do, or you might be having a contract that you can't make a permanent appointment to, and therefore you're using an agency to provide that person. Now, there is obviously differences between those two. This one has been set as a permanent member of staff, and they are employed until they make the choice to resign. But then we have three other categories. Outsourced, meaning that I'm buying the provision from another organization. There is obviously similarities between outsourced and agency, but outsourced can be used within a multi-academy trust where somebody who's employed within another school might be being used within my school. Seconded means that it works the other way. So obviously it's the reverse of the outsourced. So a seconded member of staff is somebody that I have on staff, but their time is not allocated against the school because they are being used elsewhere. Now, the other one that we've been asked to include is members of staff that are on sabbatical. Now, we'll go back to our active, inactive, leave, and not on leave. A member of staff who is on sabbatical will still be within contract, but has no financial cost to the institution at this point in time. So within the calculation, the cost calculations, if a member of staff is said to be on sabbatical, they are listed being within the structure of the school. So we have an employed status, but they make no financial load to the school because usually a sabbatical would be at no cost. So that's why that one's been included. And there's an automatic process now that will allow this member of staff to be assigned to sabbatical, still on our contract list, but they're not making a contribution to the hours cost or hours provision for the school and the cost to the school. So clarifying these, sabbatical, outsourced, and agency has moved from status. The only one that stayed within status is apprentice. So just to illustrate, if I was to filter this model down to teachers only, if I move here, you can see apprentice, leader, lead practitioner, NQT, qualified teacher status, unqualified, and upper pay scale. But within each of these people, we've now got the ability to have them as agency, fixed term, permanent, outsourced, sabbatical, or seconded. And there are the developments for this spring term. We're working on more for the next period in the summer term, but enjoy the analysis and the conversation that's going to come out of this development. Thanks for your time. We'll see you very soon.